All right, I just found out that our new website doesn't have our round trip latency roundup page, which is super important. Um, um, okay, KailuaMusicSchool.com/KMSTech.blog. How is anybody going to find that? Sorry, let me, KailuaMusicSchool.com /KMS Tech. All right, but that's okay. So here's my round trip latency round. Okay, good. Um, yeah, sadly, we really got to fix that. All right, welcome aboard. I have to start this over again because I thought I was live. I wasn't. I'm sorry to anybody who was waiting. Um, let me just give the URL to this guy real quick. It is sorry. It's gonna take me 1 second. I have to give this old URL to. Um, so that's yeah, sorry about this, guys. I really meant to be starting this video right now, but dealing with a web issue. This is a really important uh, page that used to be hosted on the music school, and with our new website, it got taken away, and I'm getting about 50 trillion complaints that nobody can get to it now. Okay. Okay, sorry. Okay, so this video, sorry for all the misstart. This is about Glenn Fricker, SpectreSoundStudios. He's got a video called Going Bonkers, Please Help Me Find a Fix. And this is about him having some clicks and pops and skips in Reaper and the steps he's taken to try and figure it out. I'm going to be commenting on this video, and I'm especially going to be commenting on the comments. I mean, I'm blown away by how many comments he got on this thing, and so many are just absolutely bonkers wrong. Now, this is Reaper specific, sort of, but this is a problem you have in any DAW, and you generally take the same steps to fix most of it in any DAW, but in Reaper, it's a lot more customizable than most, or probably than any. And I know I'm biased because I'm a Reaper user and one of the creators way back in the day, but if you don't know about the development of Reaper, it gets updated constantly. It used to be sometimes multiple times in a day. The efficiency of the program is miles above most, maybe all. And if you go to the absolute expert on digital audio workstations, who builds it for any DAW that you want, Reaper, Logic, Pro Tools, Cakewalk, whatever, Cubase, is Vin Curliano over at DawBench. He originally started, actually, I'm sure he's been working for a long time. He came on the scene to many of us because he created a set of tests that tested different DAWs, tested CPUs, tested OSs. Hold on real quick. I have one thing to plug in and that's it. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. I gotta go watch it. All right. Anyway, the DawBench guy created a set of tests that you could run yourself. You ran different OSs, different CPUs, different DAWs, different plugins, especially the low latency performance database for interfaces. And usually he uses Reaper as the test bench for hardware and for testing plugins. You see how many of recomps, for instance, or re-X comps can you run on this interface or that. And you can really take a look. You'll see a drastic difference between the efficiency of different drivers. Like when people all talk about how this interface is better than that interface, and yet they all use the same drivers, the performance is going to suck for the most part equally, no matter how much they cost, unless you're running something with better drivers like an RME. And, the difference is kind of mind-blowing when you compare that to others. Anyways, these are the experts. They can tell you about the development. And when you're talking about all this technical stuff, this is the place. Basically, it's Jim Roseberry and Vin Curliano over at DawBench. I think Jim Roseberry has a Studio Cat or Perfect Audio, I think is his company. He makes DAWs right here in the US of A. I think Vin Curliano's in Australia. Actually, DawBench has a podcast where they have on a lot of the different developers of different DAWs, hardware systems, and everything. Anyway, it's all a bunch of technical nonsense, but just saying that if you don't know Reaper's development, Reaper is absolutely, efficiency-wise, usually blows the hell out of the other DAWs. And if you need to customize something, it can be customized. If something needs to be fixed, the developers hear about it instantly, and there's usually a build very quickly. And the only reason, I'm not making a commercial here, but the reason I'm saying all this is that a lot of the comments are so ignorant about this fact. And if I just go to look at the release logs, where's older versions? Sorry, old versions. So if we look, let's see, April 23rd, March 14th, March 1st, February 28th. The releases are like 2 weeks at the latest apart. And the fixes and the optimizations and the customizations are insane. So you're going to see a lot of people saying things about like, oh, if they'd ever update their software, that's not even close. A lot of other things. It was one of the first native M1 apps. It's not Rosetta, whatever. You can still run it in Rosetta if you want, but it's been M1 native for, I think, actually in some parts of it longer than Apple's own Logic was. So all that babbling aside, let's get to the video. I'm sorry, we're 8 minutes in and I'm still just babbling. And here comes somebody. It should be up. What's wrong with it? Sorry, we got bands rehearsing today. Sorry. We're finally going to go start this video after all that disclaimers and caveats. And I'm the one who's always saying we should be able to talk without disclaimers. And there it was, disclaiming everything. So here we go.
Guys, I need your help. I am a huge fan of Reaper. I've been using it on this show since about 2015. It's been running fantastic up until recently. And I've come across a problem that I cannot find a fix to. I record a lot of amp sims on this show. Tonex, Modern Metal Songwriter, Bogren, Amp Nub, you name it. There's some amazing amp sims out there. I'm using them, but here's the problem I'm running into. I'm getting this using Reaper on an M1 Mac Studio. Hear that?
Okay. So you guys heard a glitch, gap, buffer underrun, buffer overrun, click, pop, whatever you want to call it. These are very common in digital audio when you're troubleshooting stuff. It's almost always something hanging on to the output buffers and not filling them fast enough because something else is just hijacked something. There's going to be a lot of people who are saying that's a noise gate. That sound. That's not a noise gate. That's the full level signal. A noise gate, if that was the problem, it would just stay cut out right after that. And you can actually hear the noise gate come on at the end, right after the third glitch. You can hear kind of the bubbling out of the noise gates chattering off. It doesn't seem to have a hysteresis control on it, possibly. This is a glitch. This isn't the noise gate. People are going to say it's the noise gate. That's not the noise gate. It could be the noise gate software that's screwing up, which could, happens all the time. Let me play this again so you guys get a good feel for this.
Studio. Hear that? Clicks and pops. Needless to say, that is ridiculously frustrating. Now, I've been working on this problem for the last few months, pretty much ever since I got the M1 Mac. I mean, it's a great computer, and it chews through 4K video footage like you wouldn't believe. It is awesome for YouTube production. But for some reason, I'm running into clicks and pops on Reaper, and it doesn't seem to matter the interface I'm using. I'm running through an RME Fireface UFX Plus right now. Got that issue. Focusrite Redline 16, they're top of the line interface. Guess what? It's got that problem too. Neumann MT48, one of the most glorious interfaces I've ever come across. I just demoed it. It was amazing. Still has the exact same issue. Random clicks and pops, and I don't know why. This is not living up to the...
So we've seen several different interfaces. That's a good thing. If you can check with different interfaces to find the problem, that's awesome. And that's a great troubleshooting tip. I have a feeling these are all going through the same port. Apple does some things to their ports that you'll hear about on the DAW Bench show that could be making this problem. And you're going to see that he does it in a different DAW and he doesn't hear this problem. However, just because something says it's at a certain latency does not mean that. The DAW doesn't necessarily mean that. There's things like ASIO guard and other things. Not ASIO on the Mac, but still, yeah, there's other things like that. Just because it says that number doesn't mean much. So here's something you can go to our music school, kailuamusicschool.com, go to the audio tech thing, and you'll see the round trip latency roundup. And I'm comparing the actual round trip latency from different audio interfaces at different sample size. So when somebody says, "Oh, it's 256 samples," that's going to be 13 milliseconds, right? Well, maybe. On some Vesicon drivers, it could be 14 milliseconds. When I say Vesicons, the Sycon.de, they make most of the drivers for most of the USB interfaces out there. Check it out, man. Like 256, you got 14 milliseconds, 15 milliseconds on the Audient ID4, 20 milliseconds on the Behringer. It's funny because it's basically the same driver. DigiDesign MBox, 16 milliseconds, 23 milliseconds for ESI. These are Firewires, I think. A Firewire Liquid's 56, 13 milliseconds. The old generation Focusrite Scarlett 18i20, 24 milliseconds. So just because it says 256 buffers doesn't mean squat. There's hidden safety buffers. PreSonus, the makers of Studio One, actually have a pretty good page that shows on where your actual round trip latency comes from. And then you get something like an RME, who make the absolute best drivers anywhere, and you're gonna have lower numbers. Some of these are a little bit funny because this is old days. I actually have to update a lot of these, but there you go. So anyway,
to the promise of the M1 chip. The M1 is supposed to make everything faster and more efficient. Now, I'm at 32 samples here, but...
Okay. So, you guys, I know, I'm sorry I keep stopping this. You guys have heard me making fun of latency purists all the time, and, you know, there's going to be somebody who goes, why would you need such low latency? Because if you are standing 10 feet away from your amp, that's 10 milliseconds, so what are you worried about? Why is it got to be so small? That's true. And I'm one of the people who generally is not bugged by, if I'm playing my guitar through the computer or whatever, I'm not really upset by something. I know I get upset at about 13 milliseconds round trip latency. Below that, I don't really care. And I know there's a lot of people who are a lot more sensitive to it, and there's a lot of people who aren't sensitive to it at all. And I mean, you can have some ridiculous buffer sizes. When I was making the Bringing the Studio to the Stage articles, what I found was the shortest round trip latency you could get on an iPad or iPhone interface was 20 milliseconds. And yet all these guys out there are like, needs to be zero latency. Like when I play through my iPad, I'm like, well, 6 milliseconds through an RME is a lot shorter than 20 milliseconds through your iPad. But they believe that 20 milliseconds was zero latency to them. And the Digitech drop pedal, for instance, has like 15 milliseconds latency at least. It may be more. And you always read the latency purist going, well, you need it to be zero latency like the Digitech drop. I'm like, oh, really? It's 15 milliseconds, man. So, again, I am not a latency purist, but there are situations where you need to have very low latency. Let's say situations where you can hear both the original audio and the latent audio. And, of course, yes, there's hardware ways to mix around this, but that's a whole nother ergonomics thing. And some people like to work that way. Many people don't. So, for instance, a singer. Some singers don't really care if they kind of hear themselves doubled up. Other singers get very upset around 6 milliseconds. And some don't care. Some think, oh, man, that's cool. It's an echo. You can even run into phase and polarity problems. I'm saying them both so the pedants out there don't get me. But you can imagine it's very simple to get just the right latency that what should be going up on a waveform is the negative excursion instead, and you're getting phase cancellation or constructive interference, which you really don't want either. So there are times when you want the latency low. I don't know about 32, man. This is crazy. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. 32 is insanely short. And something that, again, I'm going to have to say, I'm sorry, there's so many caveats. 32 samples in Reaper is not the same thing as 32 samples in another DAW, or it may not be the same thing. There are some others that are pretty honest about it, but just because it says 32 samples is the block size that you're asking for, doesn't mean that it's going to be 32 samples. And unfortunately on the Mac, you're kind of stuck. You don't have to use the core audio drivers, but in general you probably are, and those are always going to be a little bit slower than the ASIO drivers. I know. I'm going to get lynched for it, but it's true. Check it out on DAW Bench. 32 samples is insane. It's very low. I know there's people who run at 16 samples for some stuff, but you're asking for it. I mean, really, do you got to be that low? What am I at right now? Let me see. I'm looking at my Reaper. This is 256 samples, I think, because I was doing something that was kind of task intensive. But really, I usually run it at 128 samples, and can't remember what that comes out to on this particular RME interface, but I'm sure it's pretty short. Let's see. Let's try this out. So he said he just fixed this, so let's try going to it. Nope. This should have shown, but it didn't. So, how do you clear cache on Chrome? I'm just gonna hold Control. It is not going there for me. Oh. Sorry, I'm making sure we got the making sure our school still points to the right web page. Email, should I send Basil Space Track? Okay, let me get to that. Okay, so anyway, let's see what we can. So RME, did I even have one of the USB RMEs at the time? I don't know if I have one. Looks like it's going to be about 6 milliseconds. Okay, so yeah, I'm it's pretty low, but okay. Anyways, so 32 samples is nuts. 64 samples is pretty nuts. I know you guys are going to tell me I run 8 samples on my computer, but you know when you're really mixing and stuff, do you really need your latency that low? I mean, when you're playing, you're going to want it low, but again, I don't want to torment Glenn, and there is a psychological factor to this too, that even if it doesn't bother you, you're gonna think it does. I think there's actually been studies done that people really just can't hear this stuff below like 6 milliseconds or whatever. It really, for him playing here, it does not need to be at 32 samples. This is a big problem. This is a big issue, but there's a chance that he's running 32 samples on the other DAW and it's working. Again, that doesn't mean it's 32 samples, but
even if I increase it to 64, I still get issues. I still get pops and clicks. Just at random
but 64 is still crazy short. I'm sorry. I know latency purists are going to hang me for that, but it's still short.
Appropriate times, just enough to drive me absolutely bonkers. Even if I take the block size all the way up to 90.
Somebody on Facebook is saying Glenn wasn't trying to get it low for mixing. It was for playing guitar. Yeah, that's true. But again, even if he was at 128 with I think he should be still under 6 milliseconds or right around there, which I think, you know, I'm not gonna hold anybody to this, but I'm pretty sure that the actual psychoacoustical studies were done that would show that I think nobody really cares. There's still, again, like I said, there are plenty of times where extremely low latency is absolutely critical, and especially when you're hearing two things, the acoustic sound and the electric sound at the same time. But I still think 32 is too low. I'm not. The other thing is, I'm not 1,000,000% sure that when he types in 64 and changes it there, that Apple is actually going to comply. This is why you got to run a round trip latency check when you actually do this stuff. We've run into so many times where you've changed the buffer size on Mac and not actually got the buffer size you were pointing at. And again, different DAWs have different ways of interpreting what you mean by that buffer size. But yeah, thank you. That's a really good point. It's for playing guitar, so you're gonna want it low enough so it's not bugging you. But again, so many of these latency purists were out there running through their iPhones at 20 milliseconds and be just fine with it. I think Glenn's gonna be okay. Okay, so you're around 8 milliseconds, and 6 is good for you. So 8 milliseconds bugs you. I know that when I hit 13 milliseconds, it really disturbs me. But I think when it gets like 10 or under 10, it doesn't bother me at all. So I'm not as sensitive to it as a lot of people are. But like I keep saying, the funniest thing is when you actually test a lot of these latency purists, and it turns out that they've been playing through Digitech drops, which are adding 15 milliseconds of latency, and they're saying that's zero latency and it's fine, and yet 6 milliseconds from the computer is too long. So a lot of times these guys are just full of crap. But yeah, 8 milliseconds, you notice it. You know, and it's funny. The other part that really cracks me up about this latency thing is when we have people in, you would think that the faster the player, the more bothered they'd be by higher latency. But it seems to be like some of these like super slow blues guys, 10 milliseconds of latency or 12, absolutely bugs the hell out of them. And then the super shredders are in there playing at 16 milliseconds and fine. So it seems like it's just a human variability thing. Yeah, 80% of people can't tell latency past 10 milliseconds. I think that's true. I think there's some study. They may have linked it on the Reaper forum, but I'm not gonna fry Glenn on this. And that was where they just started jumping like, well, if you're 10 feet away from your amplifier, it's the same as 10 milliseconds delay, so that shouldn't be bothering you at all. I'm not gonna say that. I'm gonna say he wants it low. I don't think with an RME he definitely doesn't need it at 64. That's going to be insanely low. What is that going to be? That is going to be. I mean, this is for the old USB ones anyway. Let's see. It's going to be 4 milliseconds or something. Yeah. So, anyways, let me go on with this. But again, this block size is super low, and we are probably not comparing apples to apples when we do block size between the two DAWs. So let me go on from here.
6, guess what? I still wind up getting the occasional click and pop. It's unreliable because it's so unpredictable.
Yeah, intermittent problems are such a horrible pain to fix. It just sucks. Absolutely suck fixing intermittent problems. And man, that's painful.
Granted, we're at 2.9 milliseconds latency, and the only way I can track on an M1 with an amp sim on Reaper is by using 128 blocks. That's 3.5 milliseconds. I can understand why that might not seem like such a big deal, but believe me, if you're trying to play with any kind of precision, you want to have the latency as low as possible. I
think 3.5 milliseconds is fine. I know people are going to fry me for that, and they're also going to fry him for wanting it that low, but I'm okay with that.
The time it takes for the sound to make a round trip from your pickup through the computer and back out your speakers. Any more than that, and it's really becoming kind of unacceptable, especially with 2023 technology. This is the maddening part. This is using the M1 Mac Studio, the computer that everybody told me was so incredibly awesome. And yet I was getting better audio performance. I could run Reaper at 64 samples of latency on a Hackintosh. With about half the power that this computer has, with no audio dropouts.
Yeah, so see, he'd been running Mac just fine on Reaper. It's this new M1 that's making the problem. Again, if you don't know Reaper's development, you're going to see in the comments the zillion people saying, oh, it needs to be M1 native. It's been M1 native for years. But it's this particular Mac that's making the problem. It's this new M1. I'm running M1, and it is smoking fast. So I don't know. I don't normally run. It's for testing. I have to test this one more time. Webmaster's working on something. Okay. So yeah, I was having a little web problem. Okay, so let's see. So we know it's this particular Mac. There's a million people in the comments telling me, hey, I'm running an M1 that's smoking fast. I'm not worried about it. But again, I don't know that people are running at 64 samples or 32 samples, but whatever. It may be what he wants to run. So that's not going to
whatsoever. So my question is, what the hell's going on? So this is my typical recording setup anytime I'm doing a guitar demo. I'm running Amplitude 5 with a Tonex patch.
Yeah, you see what's right here? Get ready.
And that's running into Spectre Digital's Prism, which is available right now as a pre-order. A couple other things here. I've got, cock blocker gate, tube take EQ.
So here we go. Later on, you're going to see in the comments, people are going to say, oh man, see, it worked in the other DAW. It's fine. It's the exact same session and it ran, so it must be Reaper. Wrong. If you see cock blocker in there, cock blocker uses routing that I specified back in like 2006 or whatever for Reaper. And I thought by now, 10, 15, whatever years later, every DAW would have this kind of routing by now. But you cannot route cock blocker this way in Studio One. You can't do it in Logic, as far as I know. You can't do it in Cubase. You might be able to do it in Cakewalk, but I don't think so. I think you can do it in Pro Tools. Most DAWs don't have the routing to take advantage of what Cockblocker can do. So right off the bat, we're looking at Cockblocker here in Reaper. It can't be run this same way on Studio One. So this also means that if he's running this correctly, he's running, if you don't know, Reaper, you can have 128 internal channels on every single track in Reaper. It's kind of a weird concept to think about, but on every channel of the Reaper mixer, there's an individual 128 channels available for each channel. They're not shared. I mean, you can share them with each other, but each one has its own 128 channels. And that allows you to do the kind of routing we used to do in the real studios, where you'd take out your screwdriver and your soldering iron and start patching things in where you want them. And you cannot do that this way in Studio One. You can't do it in Logic. You can't do it in Cubase. So when you see later on when they're saying it's the same session, it's not the same session. Assuming he's using the 4-track channels here, which I'm almost positive he is. Otherwise, what's the point of using Cockblocker for it? Okay, so here you go.
We'll do the Pultec thing. Watch my video on that, by the way, if you ever get a chance. A little stereo touch and a little L1 limiter. That's it. This is not a huge drain on the CPU at all.
And it's not. I guarantee it's not showing jack. And if you inside Reaper, if you're doing view performance meter, you can do something similar on other DAWs. In Reaper, you right-click the performance meter and make sure you show display RT longest block processing time. And so you're going to be able to see what exactly, how much the CPU, how much effects these things are taking up, how much real-time CPU time they're taking, how much total CPU is getting munched. And I guarantee that if you were to check this on here, it's going to be something super small. However, again, there's a chance that he's running on the efficiency cores of the M1 rather than the performance cores. And I think by default, though, Reaper should set it to the performance cores, but he may be running the preferences from his old Mac, and he might have to trash his preferences, honestly, or just set some of them to default. Let's see, if I were to go to sorry, his band's practicing in the background. If I were to go here, and it's going to be a little bit different on the on the Mac, but there's going to be a couple things that it may have been set to for the old Macintosh, this Hackintosh, the old Intel Mac, that's not going to be right for the M1. Like a couple other people I think pointed this out, that it could be running the efficiency cores. Probably go to DAW Bench and ask about that, because again, those are the experts on this stuff. So let me go on here. So we're looking at his buffer settings here. Anticipative effects processing. That's on the default. Allow on tracks without effects. That's okay. Allow live multi-processing on. See, this one's always been weird to me, because if I check it, it actually runs better at low latencies. That may be where we want to look. Thread priority highest, is that right? Per CPU. I think I would click this, auto detect the number of needed processing threads. I'm guessing these are the prefs from the because you're getting all your key commands and stuff and all your custom scripts that you made. You're probably going to bring that over from your old one. I do that. I send it to myself. I email myself my preferences. So there's a chance that his old preferences aren't working well on this M1. So that's another thing that could be going on here.
So I don't understand why I'm getting the clicks and pops. This is how I've got the Reaper buffer settings set up. If I'm making a mistake here, hey, somebody let me know. But as far as I know, I've got everything kind of maxed out right now. And this should be giving me absolute smooth real-time monitoring through my AppSim. Now, this is the piece of gear that changed my life. This is the Sony FX3. This just made life so much easier. Lets me get my day-to-day done so much faster in the studio. It's wonderful if you're a self-shooter. But the thing that really makes the job easy is the this audio unit here on top. It's got an XLR input that handles my monologue, and then I've got the stereo 1/4 inch jack that handles a stereo guitar signal. So I'm recording 4 channels of audio into this camera at all times, which is great. It really does speed up your workflow when you don't have to resync audio every single time. Only problem is when I get those clicks and pops going out to that camera, that means I have to get out RX10 and hunt down the clicks, and that's just another step that I have to deal with when it shouldn't be happening at all.
It shouldn't be happening.
All right, now let's take a look at what happens if I change the block size to 16 and actually push this M1 chip like it's supposed to be pushed. Check out the kind of performance I'm getting.
That's about what I'd expect, but you know, honestly, you kind of deserve it for 16s, but whatever. You don't have to talk about like that. Come on. But 16's crazy. But again, I would love to see hit view performance meter. Let's see what's going on in his performance meter right there.
Well, I thought it sounded great for a second at least. So after trying numerous interfaces and trying multiple versions of Reaper, including a couple.
This is good. Going through this video, I'm running into a million different things it could be. So I'll talk to Glenn when he gets back. He's in Sweetwater right now, if you've seen the Sweetwater videos. And so he should be back in a little bit, and we'll talk about it.
These Mac OS versions here running in Rosetta mode. Finally, I thought, okay, well, hold on a second here. Maybe it's not a hardware issue.
Wait a second. Is he saying he's running?
Finally, I thought, trying numerous interfaces and trying multiple versions of Reaper, including a couple of these Mac OS versions here, running in Rosetta mode.
So I'm not sure if he's actually running both. This is really funny because it shows right here in the video that Reaper has M1 native, Apple Silicon native, and Rosetta, and yet people are still saying, "Oh, Reaper needs to be M1 native or needs to be Apple native." It's been Apple native for 3-4 years now. Come on, guys! It was right here in the video, and you guys are all. So many people said that.
Finally, I thought, okay, well, hold on a second here. Maybe it's not a hardware issue. Maybe I'm not the problem here. Maybe it is the software. So I thought, you know what? Let's try out Studio One. I remember doing a mixed demo on it there a few years back and really enjoying it. I was very curious to see what would happen if we install it just as a normal user would. Would they run into any issues using a Mac Studio?
So here we go again. I'm almost positive he's put his old preferences onto this Mac in Reaper, and yet he's making a bone stock installation of Studio One here.
And just to make things really interesting, I've set the block size at 16 samples. And I'm going to run the same.
Okay, now again, said this several times. 16 samples in one DAW doesn't mean the same thing as 16 samples in another DAW. Got to understand that. You got to run a round trip latency test to really compare apples to apples.
Plugin setup as well. Cockblocker, Amplitude, Prism, TubeTech EQ, you name it.
So he says he's running Cockblocker, but you cannot route Cockblocker, I would say correctly, but you cannot run Cockblocker. You can't route it the way you would route it in Reaper. I mean, you could route it dumb in Reaper, and then you can do that same dumb routing in Studio One, but you really won't get the advantages of what Cockblocker can do. So this most likely isn't an apples to apples test.
Check this out. 16 samples of latency.
Now, I'm pretty sure that there's a safety buffer when you're running Studio One. Let's just look and see if I can find. I think I heard about it on DawBench actually. Oh, 2018. No. Yep, here we go. Studio One audio dropout protection and low latency monitoring. Latency management engine run face the original audio image. So what exactly does dropout protection do? I have a feeling any side effects of using high dropout protection settings. Using high dropout protection settings leads to either some latency or lag. Okay, so here you go. Chances are that 16 samples is not 16 samples. We don't see it. Yeah, see, we've run into so many things that this could be at this point. I'm betting that dropout protection, whatever it's called, dropout protection. Dropout protection is almost guaranteed to be some safety buffers. It sounds like it because he says it adds latency, right? So 16 samples ain't 16 samples. So this is not an apples to apples test, assuming that thing's on.
Just to make things really interesting, I've set the block size at 16 samples. And I'm going to run the same plugin setup as well. Cock blocker, amplitude, prism.
Yeah, see, you can't. You can't. Well, that's Tonex.
TubeTech EQ, you name it. Check this out, 16 samples of latency. That's certainly some amazing performance, I gotta say. Not to mention, I am running Studio One. I'm also running ScreenFlow at the same time, and that's recording multiple audio streams as well as spitting audio out to the main camera over there. But seriously, at this latency, it's like playing a live amp.
All right, I don't want to embarrass Glenn, but who is in that dropout protection's on, and this thing is actually like at 128, 256, whatever samples, and he doesn't hear the difference between 16 samples and 256 samples or whatever the dropout protection's given him. The cool thing about Glenn, and even though everybody seems to be a very controversial dude, a lot of people hate him, if that turns out to be the case, Glenn will admit it. That's the difference. Like, that's why, as much as some people don't like him, I do, because when you show that he's wrong, he admits it, and he makes a video buffooning himself, and he'll tell you. There's a very good chance dropout protection's on, and he's like, yeah, see, this feels like playing a real amp, and it's probably more latency than when he had Reaper on it at 128 samples. So again, just because your DAW says it's running a certain number of samples latency, that does not mean that's what's happening. You've got to check this stuff.
Now, this is the kind of performance I'm expecting from an M.
It's just sad because if it turns out that he's really at like 9 milliseconds or something, he's just putting his foot in his mouth. But again, we all do this. The ear is an imperfect thing, and but it's just gonna be funny because if that's really what it is, I promise you, I will do some clowning on your behalf. Whoever's watching out here, and Glenn will take it, and Glenn will admit it. That's what makes him cool.
Mac. So far, I've been pretty impressed with Studio One. The setup was fairly straightforward. Getting everything rolling was great. No issues there. And the performance has been spectacular. I remember demoing it on the show there a few years ago and doing a mix with it, and I really liked it as a mixing platform, but I'm very cautious about getting into the editing system because that can always get really in-depth and be a little bit more confusing. But this is the sort of performance I was expecting on the M1. This is the kind of thing I've been reading about for all this time. So the big question remains, did I screw something up with Reaper? Am I running the wrong version? Or are they just not updated the code yet to take advantage of the M1 chip? Ultimately though, I need your help. If I've missed something, please let me know in a comment below because I would really love to get this resolved. And the other question I've got for you is, would you like to see other DAWs on the show? Like I said, I was pretty impressed with Studio One, but maybe I should be checking out Cubase or Logic or who the hell knows what else is.
So this is the problem. If you're already used to Reaper's routing, you're gonna be upset when you use these other DAWs. It really depends what you're doing. If you're doing a lot of drum MIDI drum creation, Cubase's drum grid is so awesome that if I didn't need Reaper's routing and editing, and I was really doing a lot of that drum stuff, I'd be running Cubase. In fact, it wouldn't hurt to run Cubase just for that drum editor thing. It is awesome that the grid, the MIDI creation grid, it's easier than the old drum machines like the Boss Doctor Rhythms and stuff. It's absolutely awesome. Logic's MIDI puts Reaper to shame. And but again, if you're doing stuff like he's running Cock Blocker there, you can't run that plugin the way at its full power in DAWs that don't have sensible routing. And sorry, Logic, Cubase, Studio One definitely don't have it, and it's kind of sad, especially if you have multi-out effects plugins. I know people are saying that it's possible to run these, but I've had all these Cubase experts, Logic, whatever, on, and except for multi-out instruments, you can't run multi-out plugins in those other DAWs. So it really depends, but whatever. You want to run Studio One, whatever. I actually like Studio One for creating songs, so there you go.
Out there. Maybe Harrison Mixbus needs another look at too. That might be pretty cool. Once again, I want to hear from you. I'm here to make the content that entertains you. So hey, let me know what you'd like to see.
So let's go to the comments, because this is some funny crap. First, of course, I'm in there making trouble, but so many of these were, let's see. It sounds to me that Reaper just isn't updated enough to handle the M1. Okay, Reaper was M1 Apple Silicon native years ago. It was one of the first, if not the first DAW. I remember that there were a few things in Logic that weren't yet up to Apple Silicon when Reaper already was completely. So this is silly and updated enough. Anybody who knows anything about Reaper knows that Reaper is constantly updated. It's never not updated enough. So this is absolute nonsense. I always went back to Studio One. So a lot of people like Studio One. But yeah, you're absolutely wrong that Reaper isn't updated enough to handle the M1. It most certainly is. So this guy says, hey, Glenn, Reaper is Apple M1 compatible, but a lot of VST plugins are not. The plugins run using Rosetta within Reaper, and that can cause a small performance and latency hit. So unfortunately, I think it's up to Reaper devs to fix it. No. Reaper runs plugins in M1 native. You can do it in Rosetta if you want, but that's wrong. So let me put a dislike. Not that Facebook is going to show it anyway. This problem could be caused by the wrong thread priorities. Yep. Also disable live effects multiprocessing. I think he had that turned off in the picture that we saw. I'll have to see other. Let the Reapers, the makers of Reaper know. They're pretty good at pushing out updates when people contact them about issues. That's true, right? I mean, we know that is the one. If you're going to DAW Bench, you want to talk about why is it that Vin Curliano, why is it that DAW Bench uses Reaper for most of its testing? It's because of that. Because if he has a problem, he can talk to Justin. Justin's going to fix it. Yes, invite them on the show and see what they have to say to themselves. Well, technically, Glenn's had Reaper makers on the show before, so. Make sure that the audio sample rates match in all audio settings, blah, blah, blah. It could be, but chances are that somebody else says this was the issue. I don't think so. Could be. There's some more Studio One love, which is cool. I love PreSonus, so don't let me. I wish they would get their routing up to par, but whatever. Hey, Glenn, it seems as though it's possible Reaper hasn't updated his software to take advantage of the M1 chipset. Again, here's another one. Again, there's nothing wrong. The guy just doesn't know about Reaper. Talk to Reaper support, see if they've already had updates for the M1 chipset. Let's see what people say. Might be me. Reaper is M1 compatible, has been for some time. Plugins may not. But again, if it's running in Studio One, it should run in Reaper. It's everyone else's fault. Apple is perfect. It's not Apple's job to fix a third-party apps issue. It's not Microsoft's job to fix third-party app. You always get these apologists, right? They're absolutely useless. It doesn't help because you still got to use these plugins. So, that's crap. Okay. Reaper is M1 compatible, has been for some time. Then why did the plugins work fine when we switched to Studio One? Again, because it wasn't apples to apples, was it? I guarantee that dropout protection was on. And again, it wasn't the same because you can't run Cock Blocker in Studio One the way you can in Reaper. Yeah, so you've ported to ARM for Mac OS, so it's native on hardware and it's compatible. Sounds like Reaper is the offender here. Pestered them for an update. Logic. It's always the first DAW to be up to date with the latest Mac OS. That's not actually true, sadly. You would think that it's just like the Steinberg issue, right? Steinberg makes Cubase. Steinberg invented ASIO. Steinberg invented VST. And yet their VST implementation is kind of craptastic on their own DAWs. Their ASIO implementation is nowhere near as good as Reaper's. Okay. Reaper is apparently on Apple Silicon now. So here we go. Mac M1 is different architecture to previous Macs, so software has to be properly ported and it's compiled. So make sure, aside from Reapers, all the plugins reach out to Reaper developers, of course we have. Maybe it's the transcription that Rosetta does. It's not Rosetta. Generally, you don't have to run M1 software. It's a Reaper versus Apple M1 compatibility issue. Good thing you're an expert here, but no, it's not. This is called being on the bleeding edge technology. I still run Reaper under Windows 7 64-bit. Okay, let me tell you what it's like being a plugin developer. There are a pile of dudes out there that will not get off of Windows 7. Your stuff, it's just got to run in Windows 7. I know DawBench had like an episode where they talked about this like last stable version of Windows 7 or whatever. And I'm telling you, you wouldn't believe this. There's piles and piles of people out there who will never get off of Windows 7. So, you know, I feel bad for me. Okay, because this is, and you know, it's funny that this guy says it's an Apple M1 compatibility issue, but he's a Reaper user. He knows how fanatical Justin is about staying exactly up to date on everything. So that's kind of weird. They keep saying you have to verify your plugins are compatible with the M1. No, not if it ran on the other DAW. So if it ran in Studio One and it runs in Reaper, that's not the variable that you're looking to change. Studio One. Took M1 Native Instruments forever to support M1. You probably already figured it out. Reaper more than likely needs an update since the problem doesn't happen in Studio One. Again, it wasn't an apples to apples test, and Reaper's had plenty of updates. Let's see. Was the S1? So I was asking, was the S1 session exactly the same? And I didn't know then what I know now, and no, the answer is no. Because somebody else, it's not Reaper only have the same problem in Studio One with other plugins. I'm having the same problem with Reaper on a PC, so I don't think the problem is the M1. And that's where I am. We all have these kind of problems from time to time, especially if you're running crazy, super low like he was. And that's why videos like this, even if this one was about Macs or whatever, same issues happen to PC. So it's really important to learn why. What is this doing? And you saw me post this one. I'm going to crack up if the round trip latency of that 16 samples, in quotes, of Studio One is actually 9 milliseconds RTL, and Glenn thought it was faster than 128 in Reaper. Make sure the sample rates are the same, yeah? Again, I doubt that's what it is, but it could be. So you're talking about the latest drivers. Again, you know, I have to play both sides here. If it's running well in Studio One, then certain things aren't the variable. But however, we've got to get those tests to be the exact same round trip latency. I would almost guarantee dropout protection is on. Maybe it's set to minimum or something like that. But 16 samples is definitely not 16 samples compared to Reaper. I don't think. Well, we'll find that out. Let's see. Shame to see you having this issue on Reaper. Is the same thing happening in Logic? Interesting. So this is Tay Zonde. I'm not sure who that is, but some Logic guy. Yeah, try setting audio thread priority to time critical or highest with the options available with Mac. Again, there's so much customization available in Reaper. Like I was saying, he may have his old preferences from his Hackintosh, and that might be what's making the real problem here. Just pop those preferences back to normal and see what happens. There were so many people that were saying that Reaper needs to work on M1, and I'm like, it runs on M1. It's running on M1 forever. Have you tried downgrading the OS? No, it should still work with Reaper though. It shouldn't be the Mac's fault in this case. It could be, but I'm hoping not. Again, people saying that the Studio One versus Reaper seems to be the obvious tell-all, but it's not really. So I said it in here. It's not the same session. And this is when we talk about on my normal show, evidence-based audio. You get guys like this. They answer, I go by results, not what session it is. I'm like, so okay. So if you run a horse versus a car and the car runs the race, it didn't matter that the car had 500 horsepower. This makes no sense. You need to test the same conditions. Again, we got to get that round trip latency the same on both and see what happens. Anyway, I think I'm boring you guys enough with this tech junk. It's been almost an hour. I saw so many things that could be the problems. I'm going to start writing them out to Glenn. But I will torture him in his comments as well. I'll do this on your behalf, that if it turns out, I got to get better on Restream so I can put up the poll, put up a little poll. How many of you guys out there watching think that when he said that this is how instant an amp sounds at 16 samples or whatever, he is actually running probably 6 milliseconds, maybe more, and guaranteed more than 128 buffers in Reaper. So anyway, another thing I was going to show was that, Glenn asked for help over at the Reaper forum, or actually I posted this on his behalf. And of course, everybody put up the thing, 10 milliseconds of latency is like being 10 feet from your amp. You can live with that. But, again, there's times when you need lower latency. I'm not going to fault him for that. And I was kind of bummed because usually we're really helpful at the Reaper forum. And because Glenn's such a controversial character, instead there's kind of a little bit of poisoning the well and just attacking the character, asking why. What's the point of speculating what his problem is if he doesn't come to the forum and interact with us to solve the issue? He's out there busy. He's out there right now pushing actually one of our products, the Sweetwater. So you know what? I'm going to do this on your behalf, Glenn, because thank you very much for, I can't really travel. You can, and you're doing our work. So thank you. Anyways, I tortured you guys long enough. Thank you for everybody who tuned in and listened to me ramble. So thanks a lot, guys.